Okay, so this situation is one that really happened, and I want you to put yourself in the position of being an engineering supervisor or a major operator with offshore operations in the Gulf of Mexico, who's been left in charge on a Friday afternoon of all the operations in the Gulf. And it turns out that you and your engineers have recommended a completion procedure for a well that's got a rig on it at the moment to the division headquarters. And that procedure was returned with a revision requiring that the completion zone be perforated using a wireline conveyed casing gun and a 10 pound per gallon calcium chloride completion fluid. The idea being that calcium chloride completion fluid is non-damaging. But the formation pressure in that zone isn't known, but it was drilled with a 12.8 pound per gallon mud. So in a well control context, you would be perforating this completion zone with a hydrostatic fluid that's much lower than what you know will contain it. The rig is on standby, means you're spending money waiting on an approved procedure, and it's Friday afternoon at 3 o'clock. So you're getting ready to go into a weekend when all these people in the headquarters will be going home, and if we don't get a procedure to the rig promptly, it could cause some real delays. And so the question becomes, what would you do, or what do you think might be done in this situation that would make sense? The ethical concern is that telling the rig to follow this procedure risks that the 10 pound per gallon fluid density is not enough, that a kick would be taken, and a kick would be taken with no pipe in the hole, just the wire line and just the BOP stack and what's called a shooting nipple or something like a lubricator on top that's sealing the wire line to the well. So here's some possibilities for things that you might do that I'd like you to think about. And then John and I will discuss these a little bit. So one possibility is to call your boss. Your boss in this case is a district superintendent, but he's left you in charge. And actually what happened is that you can't reach him. So you can't get either direction or advice from your boss and who's also effectively your mentor as well. Another possibility is these are orders. They've come from somebody with more authority than you have. You send the procedure to the rig. Another possibility is to identify alternatives that might reduce or eliminate the risk of taking a kick when perforating, and advise the headquarters of those options that could be preferable. And so at this point, I think I'd like John to comment on this, what his perspective would be, and what he might think those alternatives would be in the context of your well control class.
Sure, thanks, John. I want to say thanks a lot for doing this. This is important to me, ethics in general, so I think it's a valuable thing, and it's worth the time that we spend on it. So in this particular situation, I'm not sure I know enough to be 100% sure that this 10 pounds per gallon is 100% dangerous. Sometimes we do perforate the wells under balance. Sometimes we want an under balance perforation, but if we're not set up to be able to handle that, and the risk is that if we're under balance, we've got a problem, then it definitely is our responsibility to make sure that the people at the headquarters, perhaps boss's boss, know the real risks and the real concern. I think just about every company and every rig operates with the right to stop work policy now. So this is one of those times where you would want to use that to tell somebody that at this moment, I'm going to stop work because I'm not sure that it's safe. And then as soon as I'm convinced that it is safe, that we can do the work safely, then of course we'll be happy to do it. And even in that time that we're working on getting the clarification that it's a safe thing to do, we could be preparing, for example, the 10 pound per gallon brine, or rigging up the wire line, some of the things that, so, we're spending the least amount of time waiting.
So in this situation, perforate and underbalanced would not be practical or safe. Intentionally perforate and underbalanced would not be practical or safe with a wireline conveyed casing perforating gun. Typically it would be done either with a tubing conveyed perforating gun or with a wireline conveyed perforating gun run through tubing, where there's tubing in the well when you do it. There's options for using higher density completion fluids in the calcium chloride, which has a practical limit up around 11 pound per gallon. But those fluids are kind of custom, at least at this point in time. We were using those fluids in other places, and they were essentially a custom job that would require planning and preparation. And another possibility that came up was, well, we've got the wireline unit, the logging unit on the rig. We could run an RFT, a formation test tool, have other names now, and take a formation test and measure what the formation pressure is before doing the perforating. It turns out that these division headquarters refused all of those alternatives and insisted that we follow their procedure. So now the ethical question, or some of you may view this as a safety question in the stop work authority kind of perspective, should you send the procedure to the rig or not?
Well, so you've clarified the concerns that I had, John. So initially I wasn't sure that it's a dangerous thing to do. Now that I know that it's a dangerous thing to do, then no, I can't send the orders to the rig. And this is a real hard thing for a lot of people to do, is to tell their boss no. A lot of people struggle with that, but it's for sure the right thing to do. And if the boss can't respect you for telling him no, it's probably not a boss that you want to have for a long term anyway.
And so for the student benefits, John may remember this, but this is a situation that actually happened to me. So I was the person who refused to send these orders to the rig while the rig was waiting on orders. We were spending money. And that was not a particularly comfortable thing to do. That was probably 25 years before I'd ever heard the word stop work authority. But I felt like that I could not ask the rig to do something that I thought was unsafe or that could be unsafe. And so, and I worked for that same company for about another 18 years before I left to come to LSU. And the point going forward is that there's reasons why this language like stop work authority has occurred. And that is that if something doesn't make sense, it shouldn't be done. And it certainly shouldn't be done by somebody who doesn't know that it doesn't make sense. So here's a situation, and that happened relatively early in my career, about 5 years in, as I recall. Here's another situation that's a real situation. In this case, this is not me that we're talking about, and it's not Mr. Knowles either. But nevertheless, put yourself in the position of a new field engineer for a major cementing company. That's the kind of job that has often been an entry job for our graduates at LSU. You've been sent to pump cement for an operation to plug and abandon a 7,000-foot well for an active operator in your area. When you arrive on location, the P&A rig is pulling the production tubing and is laid down about 3,000 feet. So the tubing is now actually at about 4,000 foot depth. You go to talk to the operator's rep. He says that they set a mechanical plug in the packer that was left in the well at 6,500 feet, pressure tested it successfully 30 minutes, and then cut the tubing above the packer in the plug and started pulling out of the hole. Because the tubing would need to be rerun back down to the top of the place where it was cut to spot a cement plug on top of the packer, you really can't squeeze perforations anymore without pulling the plug. As required by law, by the regulations in that area, which is, in fact, at the time was South Texas, the representative wants you to write and sign a work ticket showing that you have already spotted the cement above the plug and without ever actually having to do the work. What would you do? So this is another one of these where we did a turning point poll of the students in the class, and these are the options that we gave them. Customers always write, sign and write the report. This is a period when work was scarce, and maybe you don't know exactly what the P&A regulations are that apply to this well. Another option is tell the company representative that you can only report work actually done. Another would be call your supervisor and ask for their instructions. Maybe you could call a regulatory agency and report this as a request as an option to what the regulations require. Maybe you could call this company man's office and ask what they really want done. Maybe you could call the company man's office and tell them that he's being dishonest. These are all options that previous discussions of this case have brought up. And maybe some of you might even have other options or ideas. So you can't actually choose one of these, but if we look back at what your predecessor students selected, well, there was about 2/3 that said that tell the company rep that you can only report work actually being done. That would probably be the beginning of more discussion. And the next largest group suggested that you call your supervisor and ask his or her instructions, which might very well be the first or second thing that you would do. But we had people that suggested they might do any of C, D, or E. D, E, or F. Any of these other options. And so, John, what's your perspective on these?
Well, so very few students chose the customer's always right, which we know that's not true, that it's important to do the right thing. So the call your supervisor, this is, I think, an important thing to do. I'm not sure I agree with the ask for his or her instructions so much as I'm sure that the supervisor needs to be apprised of the situation. We want to get their input, but it almost sounds like in this, I guess it doesn't say that we will follow the instructions, but maybe we want to ask for their input or advice, so that, like you said earlier, we do want to talk with our peers, also with our boss, to make sure that there's not some kind of angle that we don't understand or some kind of information that maybe we weren't privy to. The ones about calling the customer's rep, usually if you're in the field, that's considered, stepping over somebody or stepping around somebody, and most people really don't like that. So I would call my supervisor for sure, and then after the discussion with the supervisor, it might be my supervisor that needs to call that company's rep's office and talk with them. But the real, I guess, the end of the story for me would be that, no, I can't sign a ticket for that man that would say I did something that I didn't do.
Okay, and that has really strong legal implications as well. I don't know whether you've talked about this in the class or not, but the the thing that an individual can do that that will essentially put them in the position of being a criminal is to falsify reports that that a legal requirement was fulfilled when in fact it wasn't. So
I haven't talked to the students explicitly with that language, John, so I'm glad that you brought that up. It's super important that the students know that they have that they have culpability if they sign a document that says they did something that they did not do.
And those were the results of that same poll from another class where there was a significant population that said they'd call their supervisor, but there was also a significant population that said they would go with basically the customer's request, which we've said has some significant implications, and so we'd like to make sure that you think about what those implications might be. And so we've talked about the legal implication, and in the case of falsifying a report on work that was being done for a P&A that violated the permit or the regulations, that can be have serious legal implications. But there's some real practical implications about inaccurate reports, and that is that if that well needs to be worked on at some point in the future, you start out with the wrong ideas about what might be able to be done and what could be done to accomplish the work. So, and then in this case, there's a number of additional implications that the one that's foremost probably in a lot of people's minds would be, well, this is an active operator, and your company wants to do business with that operator in general. At least that would be your expectation. You'd like not to risk future work for your company with the operator. Why did the company man make this request? I've had one experience. This is not my experience. I've had one experience where a question like this was basically a test of me rather than a real request to do something that was inappropriate. The actions that you take could influence future work with other companies. They could certainly influence your relationship between your company and the regulatory agency. They could certainly influence the public's perspective of your company. And obviously it could influence your employment with your company. So, John, have you got insights on any of those things that you'd like to share?
Well, it's tough to know what the company man was thinking. And so, of course, I would ask him. My guess would be, just from the information that we've got right here, is that he had to wait on me to get there, and he decided the cement plug is not valuable enough to wait on. Maybe he actually thought it would take me much longer to get there, and so he just thought, well, we're going to forget it. I also don't know if he talked to his boss, so I don't know if he's a rogue company man that just decided cement plugs aren't important, or maybe he talked it over with, maybe there's a whole group of guys in an office that said, yeah, this time we don't need it. So I think I would want to know those things. I don't think that would change me from not making a report that's honest and factual. What it might change is if I understood what they did, then there might be something that like you said, there's a possibility that I don't know all the rules, or maybe, sometimes it's possible to ask for exception to the rules. So a lot of times on something small like this, guys don't call, it used to be MMS, but don't call the regulatory agency to ask them, can I have an exception? But exceptions are possible. So that might be, if they'd already started pulling out of the hole and they have a relationship with the person that's in charge from a regulatory perspective, if they've got a cell phone number in their pocket and they want to call them up and say, hey, would you give us an exception on this? Well, then that could be fine. But then in that case, if they did get an exception, they don't need my report anymore.
I didn't understand the last part of that, John. If they get an exception,
they wouldn't need my report to be falsified.
Right. And typically getting an exception would be the responsibility of the operator. The service company would not have any direct role in that.
That's right. That would
the regulatory agency regulates the operator, not the service company. So it turns out that this was a real case. It turns out that the company man was serious in making this request. He did want to violate the regulations, and the engineer involved did call his supervisor, and his supervisor backed him up that we can't do this, and they couldn't do it for a variety of reasons, not the least of which is illegal, but also that if it was known that they were violating the regulations, well, that would have negative influence on their other customers and their public relations. And if this company really wanted to force them to do that, well, they don't want to work for this company. That's almost an exact quote from the person who was involved. So that's one of the kinds of things that young engineers might be faced with most often as an ethical challenge is someone asking them or telling them to do something that's not appropriate. All right, let's look at one more of these field cases, and this is another one of that same nature, but in this case it's within a company. And so put yourself in the position of a well site supervisor, a company man, if you will, on a rig that's doing a workover on an offshore platform, and switching between workover and drilling. And you're doing a multi-well program. So your well permits have a thing called a simultaneous operations plan that go with them that allow you to produce from the existing wells while you're doing these drilling and workover operations, but within specific constraints. Some of the context is this platform has not been meeting its production goals, and your boss has told you that you are to maintain production no matter what. Now you finished a well, you're nippling down the BOP to skid the rig to the next well location, and the permit requires that all wells be shut in at the surface control subsurface safety valve. All production is stopped when you're moving equipment in the well bay or skidding the rig. What do you do is the question. So this is another one where we had some predefined answers. And, excuse me, the first possibility is make sure the boss is going to be happy, just skid the rig, don't shut in production. Keep production up. Another possibility is call the boss, confirm that he really wants you to violate the permit, and if so, do so. Another one is to call the boss and tell him that you're shutting in the wells to skid the rig per the permit. You may get a response that you're being insubordinate. Another is now you are working for the operating company. Another is you could call the operator, the regulator, and ask for a permit exception. And at times there's some other things that have come up that we've discussed as well. So, John, what would you think about these?
Well, the one I like the most is calling the regulator and asking the permit for exception. So I think that one of the things that young engineers frequently don't think about is that we do have the rules, but a lot of times it is possible to get exceptions on the rules. What's important in the cases where you're going to ask for exception is that you really recognize the rules there's a reason for the rules. And so sometimes the rules are this blanket thing, and what you want to do may not really be dangerous or may not be a concern. And so if you can recognize that, yes, it's not following the rules, what I want to do, but it's safe. I found the regulators actually, they have industry experience, a lot of them. They've been doing the regulation, usually a lot of them, for a long time. So when you explain to them the reason you want to have the exception, and you can demonstrate that what you're going to do is safe, my experience has been that if you've developed a relationship with the regulator frequently will grant your exception. So that would be the ideal thing to do, so that we could keep the boss happy and follow the law. If that's not an option, or we tried to get the exception and they said no, well, if you ask for the exception and they say no, then you just can't do it. The only thing that would be worse than doing it is asking for permission to do it, getting told no, and doing it, I think.
Okay. So the objective here is that if you're nippling down a BOP stack, you're going to be picking up the BOP stack in this well bay of an offshore platform where the wells are probably 6 feet apart. And if you mishandle the BOP just a little, you can impact one of the producing trees. Now, in the case where there were no adjacent wells, the situation you just described could very well be logical. You know, if the move was going to not be close to any of the adjacent wells that were on production, that might be a reason for an exception. But and I don't know that piece of the puzzle. What I know is that this requirement was a rigid requirement that was not only in the simultaneous operations plan, it's also written literally in the regulations. So let's see what the student responses look like. And most of the student responses were for C, call the boss. And in this case, that happened. And the boss basically told this person that they were being insubordinate, that they had to nipple down, move the stack in the rig without shutting the wells in. So if those were really orders that were formal orders, one of the things that could be done is that the boss put those orders in writing. And in this case, the boss wouldn't do that. And the person involved shut the wells in and handled the operations in accordance with the permit.
That's a good strategy, John, that you mentioned there. So sometimes people do ask you to do things that you know aren't the right thing to do. They know they're not the right thing to do. And when you ask them if they would send you an email to document or clarify exactly what they want you to do, that's the end of it.
So another case where within a company where the employee did not go along with the supervisor's instruction, and it was not the end of this person's career. And the right thing was done, the safe thing was done. So those are the three kind of field operations related cases that we wanted to talk about. And
If I could just add one more thing,
Limits in
John.
this.
So I think sometimes the students may also not be aware that usually being fired is not just as simple as your boss saying you're fired. So most companies have an HR department, and the HR department has a lot of rules actually as to what a boss can do to fire you. So many of them have a three-strike system for things that are not a direct violation of the company policies. For example, if you drive drunk and the company policy says you have a company car and you can't drive drunk, then you're fired, and there's not a three-strike thing. But for a lot of things, you need to have a written warning that tells you that this thing you did is not acceptable before that you could be in a situation where you would be fired. So telling the truth or following the law is not a reason for somebody to fire you. Now that boss may not like you and he may look for other reasons to fire you, but I think it may be important for students to know that it's not so simple sometimes for a boss to just look at somebody and say, you're fired.
And my experience corresponds with that. Unfortunately, I've also had the experience where, particularly in times like this, where jobs are being eliminated, that it's real easy for a boss to pull strings that make it happen, even though it's not for the real reason. But I had multiple experiences in my employment with the same employer where there was things that I wouldn't do because I didn't believe they were the right thing to do, that did not influence my long-term employment in any way that was negative. Maybe ways that were positive. So let's keep going. One of the real situations that we've had at LSU is that students will tell us that other students are cheating, but they rarely provide names or specifics or submit a report to the LSU student, what I call the dean of students, in compliance with the LSU student code of conduct. So this was a poll of which of these following statements are true in that they are, I'm stumbling on this one. Which of these following statements are likely to be true? And so the poll, I blew the poll away, looks like. This one's a little rough, John.
That's okay, John. So why don't we just talk about each one of these options? So for example, students who are cheating are probably not learning. What's your opinion on that?
That's likely to be true.
Yeah, I think most students that cheat are just lazy, and that really learning anything is a lot of hard work. So it takes time and dedication to learn a craft, a skill, a hobby. And if you don't put the time and dedication in, you're really, the person you're cheating is yourself.
So the student's future employer might be dissatisfied with that employee, and if the learning wasn't accomplished, well, then the learning is not going to be there when it's time to put it to work.
So I've come across that, John, where you talk to somebody and you just think, man, this person is ignorant, and how can that be possible? He's got an education.
The other students' honest work and grades are degraded or seem less valuable.
I think that's also true, John, because when you get the same grade as somebody who didn't do the work, I know as someone who did do the work, that you feel like, well, I worked hard for this, and I'm not distinguished from somebody who didn't work hard.
And many of us have probably had have had feelings like that when we were students. So one that's concrete is that not reporting the cheating student is itself considered academic dishonesty by LSU. And that's true per the LSU student code.
This is
faculty
true,
are required to report every student for whom there is evidence of apparent cheating. That is true. According to our requirements as faculty members at LSU, we don't have the option of not reporting what is a apparent case of cheating. We're required to report it. So in terms of a poll, all of these statements have truth, and the last two are concrete. And the reason that I kept this slide in this presentation is this is one of the student situations that you may still face going into your final exams.
That's right, John. So this year, the students are taking their final exam from home, so the opportunity for cheating is probably higher than it's ever been.
But there's these really good reasons why that's not a good idea.
It's a terrible idea to cheat. The students probably don't even know all the potential ways that they could be caught cheating. And in this particular case, you know me, there's 100% chance that if a student was caught cheating, if there was evidence of apparent cheating, I would turn that student into the dean of students.
And that's one of many perspectives that we've shared and actions that we've both taken. Okay, and then going forward, there's a variety of things that could be valuable to you to think about. We can't discuss them in this setting, but nevertheless, it may be helpful to you to recall these things. So think about if there have been ethical conflicts or challenges that you faced as a student. Those might have been opportunities to copy or plagiarize, or a request to help others to do so. And recall how you handled that, and in hindsight, what you think about it. Some or maybe all of you have worked already at whatever kind of job, and think about if you've been forced to act against your boss's wishes at work, and whether that had some basis in ethics, and be assured that certainly Mr. Knowles and I both have in our careers. And then going forward, there's arguably really some major challenges that we face in the petroleum industry from an ethical perspective, and think about what those might be, and it might be profit versus safety. It might be challenges controlling proprietary information properly. It might be impacts of climate change and discussions of sustainability. The ethics that you may have to practice don't go away once this discussion is over. I hope this discussion is one that helps you prepare for those a little more. So I'm gonna wrap up with a little more sermonizing. I'd like you to think about what I think are the special obligations that petroleum engineers have, special to petroleum engineering specifically. Protecting natural resources is essentially our job. Our job is to make sure that our hydrocarbon resources are used in the most valuable way possible, but also protect the environmental natural resources in the environments that we work in. That we have this obligation for the health, safety, and welfare of many stakeholders with many different points of view even broader than what SPE listed. You've either got an employer or a client. You've always got a responsibility to the public. There's mineral rights owners, there's landowners, there's the government, the regulatory agencies, there's a variety of whatever the third parties are relative to your position, operators, contractors, service companies, and especially for those of us who are doing operational work, they're employees that are the people that are actually going to be involved in the work. And our colleagues in the engineering profession and the oil industry and its reputation. So, in fulfilling those obligations, we've got some very specific responsibilities that we generate accurate, complete well and production records. You're going to find that you're going to encounter some that aren't accurate or aren't complete, and you're going to start learning about the headaches that creates. That we have a responsibility to admit and correct mistakes, even the really huge mistakes that industry has made, like Macondo. At least some of the impacts have been able to be corrected or halted. And taking needed action, even if it's not your formal responsibility. Back to Dr. Bassione's view of what ethical behavior is. If you see something happening that's not right, or something that's going to happen that's not right, speak up. And with that, I'm gonna finish up by making the point that I certainly never expected to be on C-SPAN when I was your age. There wasn't any C-SPAN. And I certainly never expected to be testifying before a president's oil spill commission. So again, one of the litmus tests is think about whether you would want to see what you have done or neglected to do in the headlines of the Reveille or on the nightly TV newscast. Do things that you'll be proud of. And look forward to hearing someday about what those things have been.
Thank you so much, John.